You're watching an old Western film and you see a lone cowboy sitting by a crackling campfire under a painted sunset, a simple tin plate of beans on his lap. It's a classic scene from these kinds of movies. But what if I told you that image is almost entirely a myth? The reality of what cowboys actually ate on the great cattle drives of the 19th century was a far more complex, gritty, and often shocking story of survival. The truth is, their diet was brutally monotonous, but it also featured bizarre delicacies that would make most of us turn pale today. This isn't the story of simple campfire meals. It's the story of a diet built on desperation and incredible ingenuity. If you enjoy uncovering the real history of the Old West, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and give this video a thumbs up. You won't want to miss the unbelievable truths we're about to uncover. Part 1. The Holy Trinity of the Trail. The biggest problem on a long cattle drive was simple. How do you feed a team of hard-working men for months, hundreds of miles from any town or store? The solution wasn't about taste. It was a calculated system of survival. The Holy Trinity of beef, beans, and biscuits was chosen because it was portable, preservable, and packed with calories. First, let's talk about the beef. Cowboys were surrounded by thousands of cattle, but the great irony is that a fresh steak was a rare luxury. Those animals were the trail boss's entire investment, his walk-in profit. To slaughter a healthy steer for a meal was like a bank teller helping himself to the vault. It just didn't happen. So when did they get fresh beef? Usually it came from an animal that was too sick, lame, or stubborn to make it to market, or from a young calf that couldn't keep up. Most of the beef they ate was actually jerky. But this wasn't the tender, flavorful snack we buy today. The cook would cut meat into thin strips, salt it heavily, and dry it in the sun until it was hard as a rock. This trail jerky was tough, incredibly salty, and took a lot of work to chew, but it wouldn't spoil. On the rare occasion a fresh animal was butchered, the cook wasted nothing. After frying the tough steaks, he'd throw flour into the sizzling beef grease left in the skillet. This created a thick, savory gravy known as sop, or Texas butter, which cowboys would ladle over their biscuits. If beef was the luxury, beans were the bedrock. They were the undisputed cornerstone of the cowboy diet, a reliable source of protein that fueled the grueling work. Pinto beans were the top choice. They were cheap, nutritious, and didn't take up much space in the chuckwagon. But making them edible was an all-day job. The process began in the morning when the cook would put a huge pot of dried beans to soak in water. That pot would then jiggle around in the back of the wagon all day, which helped the beans rehydrate. As soon as the wagon stopped for the night, that pot of beans was the first thing to go on the fire, slow cooking for hours to be ready for breakfast the next morning. Their importance is captured in their nicknames. Cowboys called them prairie fuel and also whistleberries, a humorous nod to their well-known digestive effects. The third pillar of the trail diet was bread. The most prized bread of all was the sourdough biscuit. A skilled cook took immense pride in his biscuits. The secret was a sourdough starter, a living culture of yeast that the cook protected like a prized possession. He kept it in a crock and fed it daily with flour and water. On cold nights, the cook would even sleep with his sourdough crock to keep the yeast from dying. At the other end of the spectrum was hardtack. This was survival food in its purest form. Made from just flour, water, and salt, it was baked until it became incredibly hard and dry. It was nearly impervious to spoilage, but so tough that cowboys called it gun wadding and had to soak it in coffee to make it edible. Part 2. The King of the Campfire. The myth of the lone, self-sufficient cowboy couldn't be further from the truth. A cattle drive was a highly organized community with a strict social hierarchy. At the very center of this world was the chuckwagon, and it was the undisputed kingdom of the most respected and often most feared man on the trail, the camp cook. Invented by cattleman Charles Goodnight in 1866, the chuckwagon revolutionized cattle drives. It was a converted Army surplus wagon, a mobile kitchen and pantry that carried everything from spices and Dutch ovens to the entire crew's bedrolls and blacksmithing equipment. Presiding over this rolling kingdom was the cook, known to everyone as Cookie. He was second in command only to the trail boss and was often the highest paid man in the outfit, earning more than the most skilled cowboys. A good cook was essential for morale, and the best cowboys would refuse to sign on to a drive if they knew the food was bad. Cookie's workday was relentless. He was up around 3 in the morning to grind coffee and get the fire going, often using dried cow chips for fuel. Before the sun was up, he had a hot breakfast ready for the crew. After they ate and rode out, he had to wash every dish, pack the entire wagon, and then drive his mule team ahead of the herd to get to the next campsite and start preparing the evening meal all over again. He was also the trail's doctor, dentist, barber, and even banker. Critically, he was also the navigator, pointing the chuckwagon's tongue toward the North Star each night to give the trail boss a head-in for the morning. The area around the chuckwagon was Cookie's sacred territory. A strict code of conduct was observed, and anyone who broke the rules might face his wrath. A cardinal rule was to never ride a horse near the wagon in a way that kicked up dust into the food. And no one ate until the cook gave the call, usually a loud shout of, "Come and get it." Mealtime was for eating, not talking. You filled your plate, moved away from the fire, and never left food on your plate. That was a grave insult to the cook. There was even a rule for the coffee pot. If a cowboy went to pour himself a cup and another man shouted, "Man at the pot," Zrenia, he was obligated to pour a cup for anyone else who wanted one. Part 3. You won't believe they ate that. The true character of cowboy cooking is found not in the staples, but in its most extreme and resourceful creations. They lived by a simple rule: waste absolutely nothing. This forced them to find food in the most unlikely of places. At the apex of this resourceful cuisine is a dish with a name as rough as the life itself: son of a gun stew. This ultimate nose-to-tail meal was typically made when a young unweaned calf was too weak to continue the drive. As one cowboy famously said, the cook would throw everything in the pot but the hair, horns, and holler. The stew would contain tender cuts of meat, but also the calf's heart, liver, tongue, and kidneys. But the ingredients that made it famous were the brains, used as a natural thickener, and an organ known as the marrow gut. This milk-filled tube, found between the calf's stomachs, was only edible while the calf was still nursing, and its contents gave the stew a rich flavor that cowboys craved. This philosophy of using everything continued during Roundup. The byproducts of castration were not thrown away. Instead, they were turned into another cowboy delicacy known as calf fries, or Rocky Mountain Oysters. These were considered gourmet eating for cowmen. They were seasoned, rolled in cornmeal, and fried in hot grease until golden and crisp. The flavor was described as being both nutty and gamey. When supplies ran low, cowboys turned to the land. They hunted any wild game they could find, including deer, wild turkey, and rabbit. But in the true spirit of survival, their definition of game could be stretched. Cowboys were known to eat snakes and, most surprisingly, skunks. Old pioneer guides even gave instructions on how to properly prepare a skunk, with the critical warning to carefully remove the scent glands first. They also foraged for wild plants, leading to some truly creative dishes. One of the most inventive was sheep sorrel pie. The wild herb has a tangy, lemony flavor, and it was used as a substitute for citrus fruit to create a sour and sweet dessert. Part 4. Cowboy coffee and trail troubles. What cowboys drank was just as important as what they ate. Besides his horse, a cowboy's most essential companion was coffee. It was a necessity, not a luxury. A cup of strong black coffee provided the jolt needed to start a pre-dawn watch and the warmth to ward off a prairie chill. The cook would boil water, toss in a handful of ground coffee per cup, and let it brew. The result was famously potent, earning the nickname six-shooter coffee, from the legend that it was strong enough to float a revolver. A revolution in trail coffee came with Arbuckle's Ariosa coffee. Before Arbuckle's, cooks had to roast green coffee beans over the campfire, a difficult process. The Arbuckle brothers patented a process for glazing roasted beans, which sealed in the flavor and kept them from going stale, providing a consistent product that became the standard on cattle drives. The other essential beverage was whiskey. It was carried for medicinal purposes and was the go-to treatment for everything from a cough to a snake bite. While the cowboy diet was high in calories, it was dangerously lacking in key vitamins, especially vitamins A and C. This poor nutrition had serious consequences. The most pressing danger was scurvy, a debilitating disease caused by a lack of vitamin C. For men who went months without fresh fruits or vegetables, it was a constant threat. Their primary defense was canned tomatoes. Disease was actually the single greatest killer on the trail, far deadlier than gunfights. Unsanitary camp conditions led to cholera and dysentery, while pure exhaustion led to frequent accidents. This harsh reality, a deficient diet, constant danger, and primitive medicine, paints the real picture of the profound daily struggle that was a fundamental part of the cowboy experience. The romantic image of the cowboy dining peacefully by a campfire dissolves under the harsh light of historical fact. The real story of what cowboys ate is one of a relentless and ingenious battle for survival. It was a world where fresh beef was a rare treat, beans were an all-day chore, and bread ranged from a treasured biscuit to a rock-hard cracker. The most unbelievable truths of their diet lie in its absolute refusal to waste anything. From son-of-a-gun stew made from nearly an entire calf to the delicacy of calf fries, cowboys practiced a nose-to-tail philosophy born purely from necessity. This world was ruled by the camp cook, and the strict laws of his chuckwagon reveal a disciplined, interdependent community, not a band of lone riders. The story of what cowboys ate is the story of their lives, a constant struggle of grit, guts, and gravy, a reality far more fascinating than any Hollywood fiction. If you enjoyed this real look into the Old West, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe for more true stories from history. And now for you. What was the most surprising cowboy food you heard about today? Let us know in the comments below.